Alrighty, y'all, it's about to be Halloween in July. I mean, there's Christmas in July, so is it not so far-fetched to think that maybe there could be a Halloween in July? Well, Netflix thinks so. What's going on, you guys? James here with another real review, and today we're diving into a sort of anticipated horror trilogy that I've been looking forward to on Netflix. That is Fear Street Part 1, 1994, and this trilogy begins streaming on Netflix July 2nd. Now, it's being released weekly, so you can expect my reviews weekly for this trilogy. It's based on the books by R.L. Stine, yes, of Goosebumps fame. But the movie itself is directed by Leigh, Janiak, and it's starring Kiana, Madeira, Fred Hechinger, and Olivia Scott Welch. Now, if you haven't seen the trailers, I recommend not watching them, because usually for slasher films like this, because this film, yes, is taking place in the 90s, it is a horror slasher film. See what I did there? But honestly, watching the trailer is probably not the best idea, so going cold. However, we will break down the story a little bit right now. After a series of brutal slayings, a teen and her friends take on an evil force that's plagued their notorious town for centuries. And that's about as basic a plotline as you can get from a slasher movie. And again, this is a spoiler-free review, guys, so I'm not going to get into any plot specifics, but I will tell you whether or not I like the film or if I was disappointed. Now, before we get into that, if it is your first time here at the channel, welcome to Real James, where I talk about movies like this all the time, so you don't want to miss out. Go ahead and hit the big red button below, subscribe to the channel, and tap on that bell, y'all, and hit the big thumbs up button if you're a big fan of horror movies, and if you haven't already, get loud in the comments below and let me know, what's your favorite slasher film? Mine is Scream. So yes, you can choose Scream. Alrighty, y'all. Well, you know what? Let's get into what I thought worked with Fear Street, and that starts with the name of the town. I'm not even kidding. It's called Shadyside. I mean, that's incredible. But in all seriousness, let's get into my first positive for the film. There are some really fun set pieces here in Fear Street Part 1. The opening sequence really captures those 90s vibes, guys, and I love the fact that as the film goes on, there are a couple of other sequences that I felt were pretty clever. The last 20 minutes were actually the most compelling of the entire movie to me. There's a lot of setup in this film, and I thought that by the end, at least it paid off a little bit, and I did appreciate the cinematography. I mean, there are some scenes, I'm not gonna lie, that are so gross in this movie, but the way that they're shot and they're filmed, it definitely feels gruesome, and even though I know it's a cheesy slasher movie on purpose, I still found myself wincing. I also really appreciated the attention to detail here and the aesthetic. Director Leigh Janiak does a really good job at diving into this 90s atmosphere, right? You have the soundtrack that is definitely full of a lot of 90s rock music, and then you have a lot of the clothing, the outfits, everything felt very 90s, and I love that. Never at one point did I feel disengaged from the film because of what we were seeing on screen. I even love the punkish attitude to some of our characters, and yes, even those cheesy slasher tropes were still fun to watch unfold. And you can definitely see how movies like Scream and that entire franchise have definitely played a part in crafting the vision for Fear Street Part 1. Yes, I know the novels have already been written, but to see it unfold on screen, yeah, this movie pays a lot of homage to those 90s slasher legendary films like Scream. And hey, for what it's worth, I even enjoyed some of the performances from our leads. Now, in slasher movies like this, I'm not expecting like Oscar-worthy type acting, to be honest with you, but there are some movies that do feature some standouts, and here, well, this movie's no exception. There are two characters that really stood out to me, and that's Kate and Joshua. And funny enough, both of these characters are not the main focus of the story, but Kate is played by Julia Raywald, who actually gave this film some sort of life when it is needed the most. Her character actually has an arc to some degree as well, so I did feel like the time we spent with this character really paid off towards the end. Then there's Joshua, played by Benjamin Flores Jr., who I thought did a really good job at capturing this quirky, nerdy type character who definitely is very knowledgeable and everyone underestimates him. And I'll be honest, I really do have this sort of affinity for characters like this in slasher and horror movies, because it's always the underdog that knows exactly what to do and helps get the group out of trouble. And I also really appreciate that the film does something really cool with this role too, but I can't get into spoilers here. Let's just say all that knowledge might come into handy, especially as the film goes on. Now guys, even though there are some things about Fear Street Part 1 that I did enjoy, we gotta get into the negatives, and honestly, I'm really disappointed in this first of 3 films. You probably could not tell at all that I was really disappointed in this film because I was trying to be as optimistic as possible, but guys, I'm sorry. Fear Street Part 1 is one of those films that has a great premise and just never executes all the way through. And honestly, I just was not a fan of the actual plot. It's cliche, yes, but there's really nothing pulling me into the film, and eventually I found myself checking my watch after the first half. I also don't feel like most of the writing here was as sharp as some of the tools our villains used in this movie, and yes, that's a slasher joke. It's a terrible joke. Moving on. The dialogue really is less than engaging for me, and I really couldn't find myself laughing at any of the humor, which is usually set up by Simon, played by Fred Hechinger. Yes, I could tell that the movie was playing into those cheesy jump scares on purpose, and I get it. There were some things here that were less than refined, but for a reason, because it's a slasher movie. But it just never felt fun. And even outside of the writing, I think there are two main characters that held the film back a bit too. And that's unfortunately Dina and Sam. Dina is played by Kiana Madeira and is a character who is battling with lots of emotions internally and dealing with a failed relationship with her girlfriend Sam. And Sam is played by Olivia Welch, but the thing is, both of them don't have this chemistry to them. Instead, there were plenty of moments that felt like they skirted by, and that's due in large part to just one-dimensional acting that I couldn't really buy into. And I hate to say that because I don't want to sound like a Debbie Downer, but again, I just don't really feel like both of these characters added anything to the film, and they were given the most screen time. And when you come to a slasher movie, of course you're looking for some creepy antagonist, but not even the actual antagonists in this film are all that scary either. I think we've just seen too many movies like Fear Street Part 1, so the plot lines felt familiar, all of the beats felt like we've seen them before, and I figured the one thing that could separate this film from the other slasher movies are its characters, but that never really worked out either. Instead, none of the characters were strong enough to carry this film out of just being another mindless slasher movie. So with all that being said, you guys, I do find myself a little bit hopeful for Fear Street Part 2, partly because I'm optimistic, and two, I just really want a good slasher movie for the summer. And that's the thing, I wanted that with Part 1, I didn't get that, and I'm hoping that with Part 2, when it goes back in time, we're actually going to see a little bit more of an explanation to some of the antagonists that were introduced in the first movie. And I understand that this is a trilogy, so not everything could be thrown into this film, so there were some seeds planted that I think we'll see grow in Parts 2 and 3. And what I will say is that if you throw this up on Netflix on a Friday or Saturday night, it's not an hour and 45 minutes that I think you'll feel is wasted, but for me, there's just a lot of untapped potential in this film where I feel like it could have went from just being okay to being something really great for the summer. So yes, even though I'm disappointed in Part 1, I can see this film actually taking off on Netflix and being enjoyed by so many horror fans alike. But I just wish I loved it. You know, I wish I came away from this movie really satisfied, but unfortunately, I didn't. So there you have it, you guys. That's my real review of Fear Street Part 1 1994. Now, hey, I need to know what you think about this film when you see it this week. So let me know down below in the comments what you thought of Part 1. And are you excited for Parts 2 and 3? And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit the big red button below. Subscribe to the channel and tap on that bell so you don't miss out on my review for Part 2 next week. And if you haven't already, hit the big thumbs up button if you're a fan of horror movies like me. Alrighty guys, well you know what, I'm gonna go watch adorable videos of puppies and try to wipe some of the imagery that this movie put into my head. Alrighty y'all, again, thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you at the next screening.